Imagine this. It's the night before a massive election in India, and the opposition leader drops what can only be described as a political hydrogen bomb. He's holding a press conference with detailed accusations of vote theft on an industrial scale. I mean, it's the kind of claim that could shake the very foundations of the world's largest democracy. So let's break down exactly what went down.
So, what was this all about? Well, it all boiled down to one really explosive question. Could 1 out of every 8 voters in a major state election actually be fake? And look, we're not talking about a few typos here and there. The allegation was about the systematic, deliberate corruption of the voter rolls. If that were true, wow, a claim like that could seriously challenge the democratic process itself.
All right, so here's how we're going to break this all down for you. First, we'll get into the explosive claim itself. Then we'll dive into the evidence they presented in what they called the vote theft files. After that, we'll look at the official rebuttal. Then there's a really surprising story from the ground. And finally, we'll talk about why all of this still matters right now.
Okay, so let's start at the very beginning, with the claim. Picture this. It's November 5th, 2025. You've got a packed press conference in New Delhi. The leader of the opposition, Rahul Gandhi, steps up to the microphone and he makes this absolutely stunning allegation. Not just against the ruling BJP party, but, and this is critical, against the Election Commission of India itself.
Now, what's really important here is how they framed this. This wasn't a story about some scattered local-level mistakes. No, Gandhi was alleging a coordinated top-down strategy. He was basically claiming that the very institution that's supposed to guarantee fair elections was actually in on a plan to rig one.
Of course, you can't just make a claim that huge without some evidence, right? So to back it up, Gandhi's party presented what they called the H files, a deep dive into the voter lists of the state of Haryana. So let's actually dig into the numbers they were putting forward.
The headline number was just staggering, 2.5 million, or 25 lakh alleged fake voters. Now, in a state with about 20 million voters total, that is a massive, massive number. I mean, you immediately have to ask, how could a number that big even be possible?
To put that into perspective, they were claiming that 1 out of every 8 voters on the official list was fraudulent. 1 in 8. And their point was, if you have a list that's corrupted on that scale, a fair election becomes almost statistically impossible, especially when you think about how many races are won by really thin margins.
So, where did this huge 2.5 million number even come from? Well, the H-Files broke it down. They claimed there were over 500,000 duplicate voters. Then get this, nearly 2 million bulk voters. That's 20 or more people registered at a single address. Add to that tens of thousands of invalid addresses, and on top of all that, they alleged another 350,000 voters, supposedly opposition supporters, were just straight up deleted from the lists.
But the one piece of evidence that really grabbed everyone's attention, the one that went totally viral, was this. They showed a photo which they claimed was of a Brazilian model and said it was used for 22 different voter IDs, for different women, with different names, and 10 different polling areas. They presented this as the smoking gun, proof of fraud that was so blatant it was almost absurd.
As you can probably guess, the response from the Election Commission and the ruling BJP was fast, and it was forceful. And they didn't just deny the allegations, they came out swinging.
So the core of their defense really came down to procedure. The Election Commission pointed out that these voter lists are made public well in advance for review. But they said no formal appeals were ever filed in Haryana. Their question was pretty simple. If this problem was so massive, where were the thousands of opposition polling agents on the ground? Why didn't they object?
And then the BJP came in with a political counterpunch. A senior government minister called the whole thing a tactic. He argued that the timing, just 1 day before the first phase of voting in the really important Bihar state elections, was no accident. The countercharge was that this was all a diversion, an attempt to influence a completely different election.
Okay, but this is where the story gets really, really interesting. After that explosive press conference, journalists from India Today did what you hope journalists will do. They went out to find the actual people behind the headlines. Specifically, they went looking for one of the women whose voter ID was used in that whole Brazilian model example.
And what they found, well, it was something else. They found her. Her name is Pinky Joginder Kaushik, and her testimony completely contradicted the story of vote theft. She was totally clear. She said, "I went myself to cast my vote. There's no vote theft here."
So what about the photo? How did she explain that mix-up? Well, her story wasn't one of fraud, but
You guessed it, a classic case of bureaucratic error. She said her voter ID card arrived with the wrong photo. It was another woman from her own village. She sent it back to get it fixed, but just never got a new one. But here's the key part. On Election Day, she was still able to vote, completely legally, by using her other government ID, her Aadhaar card.
So the on-the-ground investigation suggested that what looked like this bizarre conspiracy from afar, up close, it started to look a lot more like a simple, long-running printing mistake by the local office. It really complicates the whole vote theft narrative, shifting the focus from something malicious to something more like administrative incompetence.
So let's zoom out. What does all of this really mean? Why are we talking about it? Well, this whole controversy is so important because it gets at two huge issues: political timing and the very fragile nature of democratic trust.
You really have to look at the timeline to get the full picture. The press conference happens on November 5th. The very next day, voting starts in the super high-stakes Bihar elections. That timing is what fueled this huge debate over whether these allegations were a genuine exposé or just a last-minute political game.
When you boil it all down, this entire firestorm is about one thing: electoral integrity. And that's not just about rules and regulations, it's about the public's belief, the trust that the whole process is fair and that the outcome is legitimate. You know, without that fundamental trust, the whole system is kind of at risk.
And this is maybe the most important takeaway of all. Whether the problems in Haryana were because of a grand conspiracy or just a series of terrible mistakes, in some ways it doesn't even matter. The fact that this debate is even happening, that accusations on this scale can be made and are taken seriously by millions, that points to a much deeper problem: a growing lack of trust in the democratic process itself.
And that leaves all of us with a really tough question, doesn't it? When facts are so hotly contested and when trust in the umpires themselves is on the ballot, how do you even begin to measure the health of a democracy? It's a question that goes way beyond this one election in this one state.